Hello everyone, I am Justina Okechukwu and this is another package of your Energy Frontiers, proudly brought to you with support from the African Energy Chamber. Let's take off as always with a few headlines of energy news from the continent and around the world. Egypt is planning to launch 2 new bids for oil and gas exploration in at least 16 blocks in the country's south and the Red Sea by the end of 2023. The North Africa's biggest economy is looking to establish itself as a main and exporting gas. Perenco, an independent hydrocarbon producer, has signed a 20-year production sharing contract with Cameroonian National Oil and Gas Company, SNH, for the continued development of the Rio del Rey Basin offshore the Central African country. London-listed Predator Oil and Gas Company, in its interim drilling update for the MOU-3 well, announced it has identified 2 new potential shallow gas reserves at the Moulouya Fan primary reservoir target in Morocco. Invictus Energy has announced that work has started on the 2D seismic acquisition program, which forms part of the company's Phase 2 exploration program in Zimbabwe's Cabora Bassa Basin. Global oil giant Shell has outlined plans to ramp up investment in oil and gas production while helping customers across the transport and industry sectors to decarbonize. The oil major also says it plans to raise dividend per share by 15% and commence share buybacks of at least $5 billion in the second half of 2023. Now, the shift to a clean energy economy is picking up pace, with a peak in global oil demand in sight before the end of this decade as electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and other technologies advance. That's according to the June edition of the International Energy Agency's Oil Market Report, which shows global oil demand is forecast to rise to 2.4 million barrels a day in 2023, from a previously predicted growth of 2.2 million barrels a day. And that was a snapshot of your energy news headlines. When we return, a look at the global oil market as OPEC warns of rising uncertainties regarding economic growth. Details after this break. This is Energy Frontiers. OPEC on Tuesday kept its oil demand growth forecast for 2023 mostly unchanged, but warned of increased economic uncertainties ahead due to high inflation, higher interest rates, and high debt levels in many regions. In its closely watched monthly oil market report for June, OPEC sees global oil demand growing by 2.35 million barrels per day this year, with a majority of that growth coming from non-OECD economies by around 2.3 million barrels a day. Amena Bakr is the chief OPEC correspondent at Energy Intelligence, and I sat down to harvest her thoughts on what the latest OPEC outlook means for the global oil markets. Amena, it's great to have you here. So what were the key factors behind OPEC's latest position, and what does this mean for the global oil markets?
Thank you so much, Justina, for this. Basically, you kind of summarized what OPEC did in terms of the extension of the cuts into 2024. And this is the voluntary cuts, and they amount to around 1.66 million barrels per day. They also adjusted the baselines from some of the countries, especially the African countries that were unable to meet their production. So these adjustments will be made in 2024. In addition to that, Justina, Saudi Arabia added the cherry on the cake, so to speak. So in July, they will be making an extra 1 million barrel per day cut. Why this policy? They're trying to address 3 things all at once. And I really appreciate that the market didn't fully understand the magnitude, or what we're calling this mega deal. First, they want to address the short-term volatility, medium-term volatility, and long-term volatility. And by that, Justina, is not addressing immediate oil prices. As you rightfully said, we didn't see an immediate impact into the oil price. Perhaps that's going to have a delayed effect. The July cuts from Saudi Arabia didn't take place yet. We're expecting to see a tighter market by the end of this year. So perhaps that would translate into higher prices. But just one important thing I want to clarify is that there's this huge disconnect between fundamentals and sentiment in the market. And that's what's causing this lack of response due to OPEC policy.
So having said that, what do you make of OPEC's assessment of the global economic uncertainty, in particular on the demand side?
Yeah, they haven't really changed their outlook. They're still expecting growth from China. There's a lot of hope riding on that. And based on the OPEC policy that they took, they're still expecting demand to rise. And it's kind of backloaded into the second half of this year. Demand is coming back. I mean, according to our estimates too, we are seeing some of this demand. It's slower than usual, which is making now some of the analysts out in the market and observers question, what if the demand is really weaker than what we saw? Are we going to perhaps see more OPEC action? And OPEC, of course, has that flexibility. They can always call a meeting and reassess their policy. Their next meeting, formal meeting, as we know it for now, is going to happen in November.
I know you spoke about a reassessment. Do you think OPEC will revise its oil production quota again and anytime soon?
Yes, that's correct. There could be a reassessment at any point in time. They're just a phone call away. I mean, we've seen in previous meetings, they don't have to physically meet. Justina, these days, I mean, like we're having this interview today, everything happens online. So they have a lot of flexibility when it comes to that.
The IEA's 2023 oil demand growth figure was slightly above OPEC's. Any idea why?
I think it's a little bit, I mean, the IEA always kind of differ from OPEC, and we've seen a lot of differences happening between the two, and perhaps even a little bit of tension between consumer and producer states. I think they are, I don't know what methodology they're using, but their targets or numbers seem a little bit too ambitious to what we're seeing now, especially because the recovery of the growth and out of COVID has really has been slow. It's not what anyone expected. So I would be more on the conservative side, and at Energy Intelligence, we even have a little bit more even conservative numbers than the ones that OPEC has.
In the meantime, a huge congratulations from all of us at Frontier Africa Reports to the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries as it clocks 60. On Friday, June 16th, OPEC celebrated its diamond anniversary in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, marking 6 decades of the organization's accomplishments in the world of energy. The 60th anniversary of OPEC was initially scheduled for September 2020, but was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. OPEC is an intergovernmental organization that was established by the historic Baghdad Conference held on September 10 to 14, 1960 by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Coming next, African energy stakeholders discussed ways to meet the continent's fast-growing demand for affordable and sustainable power at the Bloomberg New Economic Gateway Africa. More on this in just a moment.
Imagine a future where tomorrow's solutions build a world of opportunities for all, and where human potential is truly realized, where every child has an equal chance in life, no matter where they were born. Imagine the potential of a continent built on low-carbon oil and natural gas and abundant renewable energy. Imagine Mozambique, Angola, Nigeria, Uganda, Senegal, Egypt, Namibia, and Algeria being let free to develop their natural resources without pressure from wealthy countries to leave it in the ground. Imagine an Africa where we cut red tape bureaucracy and provide better fiscal terms so we can compete globally for energy investments. African Energy Week is the African Energy Chamber's annual event held at the Cape Town waterfront, uniting African energy leaders, global investors, and executives from across the public and private sector for 4 days of intense dialogue on the future of the African energy industry, showcasing the latest technologies and innovations to 5,000 plus registered delegates from over 100 countries and international professionals from across the global energy sector. Be part of the future of the energy industry and join the energy movement by becoming an official sponsor, exhibitor, delegate, or partner. African Energy Week.
Welcome back to the program. The Kingdom of Morocco played host to the inaugural Bloomberg New Economic Gateway Africa Conference during the course of the week in Marrakesh. The two-day program brought together leaders from the private and public sectors to discuss the world's most pressing issues and evaluate potential solutions in the context of local and regional priorities. Here is a panel of discussants speaking to how Africa can realize its clean energy potential with a combination of clear policies, foreign investment, and international support. Take a look.
Thanks, Anthony. I think it's a great question because, as you heard in the earlier panels and the earlier discussions, Africa might have the best potential in terms of renewable wind, solar storage. I know that there are some battery players in the room, but at the same time, it's really challenging to attract those investments because there is a need to get a pipeline of bankable projects that will be doable. And the other issue that I think is being faced now is really the grid. Now we are in that situation where after years of underinvestment in the grids worldwide, but of course in Africa took a toll in those decreasing investments. So if I take the example of Morocco, we've been quite far in our electrification program. We have more than 99.8% of our population that is electrified. However, we are now facing that issue of the last mile and the quality of service that you provide first to the last 10%. And of course, those 0.2% that are left are the most frustrated, the poorest, and they want to have access to this sort of energy. So the traditional model of building large plants, renewables or others, and linking them to a grid that has suffered from years of underinvestment just doesn't work. And we have that conviction now in Morocco that we need to build in agile business models. It is more than an impediment. It's really a requirement to invest in it. I mean, last week I announced in Parliament that we need to invest roughly between $1 and $2.5 billion per year, and a large chunk of that is going into reinforcing the grid to enable the penetration of renewables down the road. My issue with that is it's not the amount that is an issue. And if you allow me for a second, I'll put my hat of President of United Nations Assembly for the Environment that Morocco has the privilege of chairing until next year. The issue today is not to have the numbers to add up. Mm-hmm. It's really that flow of investment that has to go, especially when it comes to the grid, with no interruption every year. It requires a lot of trust, of course, on both sides. Mm-hmm. But in the case of Africa and most African countries, there is no time to wait, because you have 600 million people who don't have access to any modern form of energy, let alone electricity. And these are countries that are the most vulnerable to climate change, to biodiversity loss, to environmental issues and pollution, which are tackling their day-to-day sources of income in large informal sectors. So I think trying to get the numbers to add up, I'm sorry to say, it's going to be a bit a waste of time.
I think it starts with the acknowledgement, to create an environment for institutional investors, and therefore also it's great to hear the Minister explaining how that is done. And then the next steps will be how can we really physically mobilize institutional capital? And this is what we try to do by bringing that in from Europe. And we need to acknowledge that especially renewable energy investments, long-term investments require long-term cash yields, a given level of return. That is something we try to bridge by building blended finance solutions. So we sit in an asset management company, Allianz Global Investors, and we build funds which enable us to provide equity for such projects on the ground. So we are financing local teams on the ground, really capable of building the required infrastructure. And the way we do that is we de-risk on fund level using public money in Germany, for example. So the German government, for example, gives us a first loss provision, which allows us to de-risk the portfolio we're investing into, and that in turn enables us to use institutional capital like life insurance money from Europe, as in this case Germany, to flow into Africa, and the long run to catalyze change, because we don't believe it's good enough to just pick a single asset. We need to build an ecosystem, and that then should really create further growth.
The gas is really important to support the energy transition because all the renewables simply need stable power generation to deal with the intermittency. Additionally, when you look at a continent like Africa, some countries have natural resources that supports hydropower or wind or solar, but others have also fossil fuels. That's what will help them really start their energy transition, because with the sale of the gas and the exploration of the gas, they can start their energy transition. So definitely we need to make sure that we have power that gets to the consumer, to the industrial, when there is no sun, when there is no wind. And this is not we've seen challenges even in advanced countries where they had to go for fossil fuels even between season and season. I look at the numbers for 5 major important countries in Europe. In the year of 2021, there was a reduction into wind production of 7%. And luckily, they had assets to support that. So it's not only from a day to day which you can solve with batteries. So there is also seasonal aspect. And there is also with the climate change, unfortunately, we've seen also droughts in Europe, for example, that affected substantially the production of hydro. And we need to make sure, as we're doing this transition in Africa, we learn from those lessons and we build a resilient grid. And we also need, in a lot of countries, to provide the affordable power, and in a lot of cases, that affordable power is natural gas.
Indeed. Grid connection is still a challenge in many of our countries with regards to how far transmission lines have been extended. So what do we do in the meantime? Because it's clear, the data is there, and shows that when it comes to electricity access, 80% of the people in rural areas are best served through off-grid and DREs, decentralized renewable energy solutions. So it's key when we look at reaching our goals when it comes to universal energy access to ensure that we have a multi-pronged approach and not only look at developing the grids and strengthening the utilities, which is very important, but it has to be done in parallel of the efforts in the decentralized renewable solutions off-grid. What are we talking about? Mini grids, solar home systems, name it. There are many alternatives that are already providing energy access to population who would not have access to electricity without those solutions. So the solutions are out there, but what's still missing? If we want to get to scale in the mini grid sector, off-grid sector in general, one imperative is to look at the cost. Cost is still an obstacle. Cost of capital for providers of mini grids and other DREs in the sector is still a deterrent. especially again, we talk about Africa, accessing debt is done at very high, the double-digit numbers for the providers in this sector, and it's just not sustainable.
And finally, the highly anticipated premier event for the oil and gas sector, African Energy Week, draws close, scheduled to hold from the 16th to 20th of October at the V&A waterfront in Cape Town, South Africa. South African companies can now secure their conference and exhibition pass at an exclusive discounted rate of $1,200 via the AEC website on www.energychamber.org. And that's a wrap on the show this week. We thank you for watching. Remember to follow the program on Frontier Africa Reports website, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us across all our social media handles as indicated on the screen. I am Justina Okechukwu, and I'll see you next week at the 2023 annual meetings of the African Export-Import Bank, or Afreximbank, in Accra, Ghana. I'll be following all the energy news and information on the ground for you. Until then, bye-bye.